Hey everybody, Sebastian here with episode 38 with Lost Hombres. So I'm excited to come back and have a very awesome special topic I'd like to talk about, which is has to do with my personal field of my career, which is psychology. And what I want to talk about today when it comes to psychology is exploring my philosophy on the tools and mechanisms that I use in therapy and where I get my systems from, where I get my belief systems from. So I want to make sure that I can explain it in a way that makes sense, explain it in a way that we can work as a team to grow towards, understanding like as a collective. And so I'm here to kind of like bridge some of these initial gaps so that everybody has a better, clearer understanding, more like a manual on how to operate the body, where I get my information from, and how you can use several different psychology belief systems and use different aspects to then develop the self into a higher functioning self or a higher actualized self. So today we'll be talking about the different tools and insights that you can use in your everyday life to improve, right? So a little bit about my background again with therapy. I finished my master's in like 2017 or so. Really started getting into therapy after that. I remember around 2019 I ended up switching to go work. So before that I was working like in a rural clinic doing mental health out there. At that time in the rural community, we were mainly focused on what is it like CBT and motivational interviewing and evidence based practices. So like solution focused was like the best way to describe it. So before that, I was doing trauma, and the trauma stuff was just like really like basic, like color out your feelings, talk about your feelings, very like expressive type of like let's play a game and talk about like what's underlyingly affecting you. So I was doing trauma work with kids. And so it was just a lot about play therapy and just kind of coming from a more open perspective, especially coming from a history of being a preschool teacher. So I had a lot of that under my belt. So that was my first job. Then again, I went to the rural community, solution focused mainly, a lot more case management than I was doing, I would say, or even social work than I was doing therapy. Because I'd only get so many sessions with people, so we had to like hammer things out, like use these worksheets, do these things, use these worksheets, do these things, feel better, right? That was the philosophy, essentially, what I was doing. And then I went to go work at a drug alcohol center, and that was a whole different program. So then I'm over here doing like way different things, more like meditation and, like really finding like mindfulness and really trying to focus on being more present, and then doing a lot of things based on like teaching about psychoeducation, addiction, the effects of things, the effects of psychoeducation from addiction. So really more doing like instructional work. There were times I was doing some sort of therapy or some weekly progress update where mainly I was trying to get a sense of like what they had learned, what they're focused on, like very specific, like what are we working towards? How are you doing that? Like justifying the work that we were doing, and then also like pushing for like, hey, like what is this person, why did this person need ongoing treatment, essentially. So I was doing the weekly progress notes on top of being an instructor, on top of doing all the intakes at the rehab or at the center. So once I did that work, that again, that was just psychoeducation side of things and doing a lot more assessment work. Then in a private practice, right? Private practice. At the beginning, really, I was just mainly doing like what I felt was, my style essentially, where we would talk about like the underlying issues, and then we would talk about which ways we want to approach it. And I would do a very like open, reflective listening type of approach, humanistic type of approach. I did a lot of work with DBT and CBT, so that was mainly the areas of work that I was working under. And then eventually I ended up developing my own style of therapy called brain balance, which I've talked about before And again, that has to do with like the idea that there's three different selves: a child, a self, and then an adult, and they each play a different role. They each are affected by trauma in a different way. They interact with each other in different ways, so it almost creates like a trinity between the three. And so you have this imbalance that can take place between the different selves, and when this imbalance takes place, it creates a negative, relationship within the self. So I was coming up with this idea on my own, and I've been kind of working towards developing it, like whatever kind of comes my way, whatever philosophies I come up with, I start implementing them into my belief system, and all this belief system came from my own philosophies. Fast forward, right now that I also work at San Isidro Health now, so that's my other job, and where I work there, we have a lot more freedom in the way we want to approach therapy, in the sense that as long as it's evidence based, you're more than welcome to use it, but they do want you to use some kind of evidence based. So it's challenged me to start really using, evidence based practices. And at first, it seemed like a big, challenge. Like, oh, I have to like follow a manual. But what changed my life was the more I researched different philosophies, the more I realized that there were philosophies that have been existing for quite some time that actually align really nicely with the belief systems that I've been coming up with on my own. And I want to teach you guys about some of these different belief systems and why I really align and resonate with them, and why I believe that if we understand these core principles, once you apply them into a bigger like setting essentially, then they will just universally apply, right? So like once you understand certain aspects of the human condition, you will start being able to implement them into changing into the highest form of self. So working with the self, working with the systems, working with all these things will help you evolve into the highest capacity of who you are, but you have to understand the fundamentals of what reality is and how it can be an impact on people. So yeah, just wanted to kind of talk about this philosophy, and I wanted to introduce you guys to some of the different core beliefs that I use. So let's talk about the main systems and how they function, and then we'll kind of go from there. So including a little bit of where I come from with my philosophy and my background on child development and the different stages of development and why they're important. So we'll start there. So 0 to 5 is your emotional state. So now we understand that 0 to 5 is when people are learning how to feel the world, and you see this in the behaviors of children, where they're touching everything, putting everything in their mouth, feeling everything. They want to experience sensations. They are open to experience sensations. So they're learning how to operate within the world that they've been operating within. So that's the first 5 years, is feelings. Second stage of development is 6 to 11, where you have, again, more brain development. This is where I say the ego is developed, which is the self nature or the behaving nature. Some people could say this is the conscious, while the kid brain is the subconscious. So there's, again, different elements. In Freud, you could say the id is the child, the ego is the core or the self. Again, the self is the behavioring mechanism, while the feelings and the body are, again, the same mechanism, which is the kid, the id. All these are all grouped in the same categories, right? So what you start seeing is different philosophies will have very similar styles of explaining the same phenomenon, but in their own way, in their own distinct terminology. But at the core of what these things are, they're very similar in their own natures. So then you have behavior, which is 6 to 11, which is the self, the individual. And this is when you could say passions, hobbies, and interests really start becoming prevalent. Like people really identify with who they are, what they like, and just a core identity. Then you have 12 to 24, which is when people start to really think. The prefrontal cortex really develops. People start to consider like their perspective. They start to compare themselves to others. They start to have and formulate their own belief systems about the world they're living in. So all these elements, right, come from the cognitive side of the brain, right, the thinking side. There's different terms for this. I call it the adult. You can call it the superego, right? You can call it the thinking, the mind, right? The brain. Many different ways of looking at this same element, right? In a spiritual sense, we could call it the Father, while the body is the Son, and the Holy Spirit is the behavior or the heart, right? So mind, body, soul, mind, body, heart, mind, body, spirit, all the same concepts, same philosophies, all within the three realm matter, right? The Trinity, right? Okay. So now we can say, okay, there's the feeling system, there's the behaving system, and there's the thinking system. So again, CBT would say the same thing: thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Another, core idea of how these systems work. So there's many ways to, again, find these core beliefs that all go back to the principle that the self is divided into three mechanisms. And you'll see three mechanisms. Another way, we have somatic therapy. And they have something called, the polyvagal system or the polyvagal theory, right? Or you could say the window of tolerance, which again is hyperarousal, right? The window of tolerance, and hypoarousal, a three-state system. And the three states are fight or flight, overreacting. So again, a reactive state, a hot state. And then you have the other side, the cold state, right? The disactivating state, right? The freeze, okay? The disconnect. And so you see that these elements start to kick in, and depending on what is happening, you're going to get a different reaction from the person because of whatever they're at, right? So what this system is saying is that we have a calm state, we have a reactive state, we have a disconnecting state, right? And so when you're in your present state, it's easier to stay reactive. And I'm going to go ahead and in a moment open up another tab. I'm going to see, last time I did this, it didn't work right. So I want to take a second to check. And I got to check to see if this works. So we're going to transition here. And then I got to listen to see if this actually works. So today I'm going to be pulling up some documents so that I can bring some supporting evidence into what we're going to talk about. And I just want to make sure that this is going to work. Because like I said, last time I did this, it didn't work. So we might be able to skip ahead while I'm testing. But yeah, so the idea, here we go. Let's see. This actually works. So today I'm going to be pulling up some documents so that I can... Perfect. So it works. Yay. All right. So now that I know this works, we're going to go ahead and look at the documents that I have on hand today. So we're going to go ahead and look at the workbook. I'm going to pull up some things and we're going to go from there. So the one thing that I want to pull up right now that we're talking about it is the polyvagal system. So let's go ahead and go to the polyvagal system. And we'll open it up. All right. So we're going to go ahead and look at the polyvagal system. So there's three parts, like I've said before, there's three sections here, right? The Trinity that you will see throughout several different therapy styles, different belief systems, religious systems. The three-pronged system is just how reality is broken down, okay? There's a present, a forward, and a backwards. It's just how it works, the three-pronged system. So the first part is the relaxed state. So this is the automatic nervous system states per Dr. Stefan Porges polyvagal theory. Relaxed. So the parasympathetic nervous system, the ventral vagal pathway, right, which is characterized by normal heart rate and muscle tone. Associated emotions, relaxed, engaged, curious, creative, hopeful. Okay? So that's what we see when we are in our stable state. We're present, mindful. All right? Now, we're going to look at the one that most people tend to know, which is the mobilized, all right, sympathetic nervous system, which is characterized by an increased heart rate, blood pressure, hormone flow, and increased muscle tone. So the associated emotions when feeling safe are energetic, active, playful, and motivated. So associated emotions when feeling unsafe is fight or flight, stress, anxious, and fearful. So as you can tell, right, the sympathetic nervous system has two different things that it could be, right? If you're connected and you're in a hybrid state, for example, you're in the playful, active, motivated, you're going to be in the dance, the sports, the performance, right? So you're going to be within that state. So you're in a hybrid state, right? Or the other state, right? Well, we'll get to that in a second. So if you're feeling your nervous system is, over unsafe and overwhelmed, the negative side, right? Well, you get fight or flight, defensive, you want to react, right? You get fearful. So when you base your life in fear, you will get those unsafe responses. If you base your life in love, you will get the safe responses, right? Immobilized. So parasympathetic nervous system, the dorsal vagal pathway. So characterized by low heart rate, low muscle tone, low energy, right? Associated emotions when feeling safe and when feeling love, blissful, dreamy, tranquil, meditative, right? So when you're at peace and immobilized, everything's chilling, you're just having a good time relaxing. Associated emotions when you feel unsafe. So depressed, unhappy, lonely, hopeless, right? And so we can see the hybrid state here is that you have the free state of defense. So I'm frozen, but I want to fight. Like, if anything gets near me, I'm going to attack it, right? And then again, when you look at the balance between immobilized and relaxed, you see the hybrid state is quiet moments of intimacy, right? Who doesn't want quiet moments of intimacy and dance, sports, and performance, right? So all of those have to do with the relaxed state, not the ventral vagal pathway, the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So we want to be in our relaxed state. We want to be able to be in what I call, that's the mindful state, right? Another way to look at this state is what we call, like I had said earlier, the window of tolerance. And so we'll pop up the window of tolerance real quick. Okay, so the window of tolerance, right? Let's go here. We got the window of tolerance here. So if we go down in our booklet here, we're going to find a spot where it says window of tolerance, right? So how trauma can affect your window of tolerance? Well, hyperarousal, anxious, angry, out of control, overwhelmed, your body wants to fight or run away. It's not something you choose. These reactions just take over. Okay, so this is when you are explosive, when you react, and what I like to call, you reach your steam state. So if you're water and you heat it up, you will steam it up, right? So it reacts with fire. So that's the explosive nature, like steam. When things reach a boiling point, they always pop off. Okay? Happens to us. That's why stress is felt on the back end and the chest, because it pops. Right? It's a boiling point that pops off. That's why you have steam coming out of the ears in a lot of cartoons when they're angry. So you have the hypoarousal state, spacey, zoned out, numb, frozen. Your body wants to shut down. It's not something you choose. These reactions just take over. This is what I like to call it, my modality, or when I talk about it, the ice stage, right? You disconnect, you feel cold, you slow down, you just like whatever. And so it's the depressive side. It's when your emotions become too overwhelming. Hyperarousal comes from thoughts becoming too overwhelming, and then your hypoarousal is when feelings get overwhelming, right? So window of tolerance, when you are in your window of tolerance, you feel like you can deal with whatever's happening in your life. You might feel stress or pressure, but it doesn't bother you too much. This is the ideal place to be. So what we're doing here is we're trying to find a place where we can allow ourselves to engage in difficult conversations but not be taken over by them, right? So like, as much as I'm aware that there is something bothering me and maybe something irritates me, I'm not going to act in irritation. I'm going to accept that this is irritating my internal system, but I'm also going to maintain my system so that I don't become even more overwhelmed, right? I'm going to try to work with staying present. When stress and trauma shrink your window of tolerance, it doesn't take much to throw you off balance. All right. So, again, when things are happening, it can throw me off. Working with a practitioner can help expand your window of tolerance so that you are more able to cope with challenges. So, the idea here is that the more that we learn how to do things like what I would call diffusion or unburdening, however you want to kind of look at these different terms, right? Or unblending. So when you are able to separate the self from the things that cause you the discomforts, you're able to build tolerance in your reactions because you don't take them as your own, you take them as an experience you're having versus something you're creating. So you're not holding or creating these things, you're experiencing them. So you're more like a passive experiencer, less than an active creator, right? Okay, so let's go down below. Let's look at this slide real quick. Window of tolerance awareness worksheet. So again, for hyperarousal, check all the symptoms you experience and enter the level of severity from 1 to 5. 1 is the least severe and 5 extreme and paralyzing. So we have the abnormal state of increased responsiveness, feeling anxious, angry, out of control. You may experience wanting to fight or flight or run away. So things to think about, right? Anxiety, impulsivity, intense reactions, lack of emotional safety, hypervigilance, intrusive imagery, tension, shaking, rigidness, addiction, overeating, obsessive thoughts/behaviors, emotional outbursts, chaotic responses, defensiveness, racing thoughts, anger and rage, and physical and emotional aggression. So you can see here, it's the explosive side of things, right? I like to say that people are in a state of burning others because they're burning up inside, so they start to create that fire against other people in their life. They start to burn everybody around them. For hypoarousal, right, we can say abnormal state of decreased responses. So disconnecting, feeling emotionally numb, exhaustion, depression, right? You may experience your body shutting down or freeze. So again, the ice state is what I like to say in my modality, where I usually write on the board where it's like positive, negative, hot and cold, the duality of the world, as above, so below. So this is the below side, right? The feelings of disconnected, no display of emotions, autopilot responses, memory loss, feigned death responses, numbness, disabled cognitive processing, reduced physical movement, decreased reactions, shame, embarrassment, depression, difficulty engaging, coping resources, low levels of energy, and can't defend oneself, shutting down, can't say no. So again, right, here we go with, not being able to be in a state of boundaries and self-respect and self-love, right? Allowing things to happen that one shouldn't, allowing things to continue that are hurting somebody, right? And so, again, this is teaching us that these extreme places, right, are a result of a mismanaged system within. So the more that I work on increasing my sense of tolerance, the more I increase my sense of understanding, the better off I'm going to be, right? And one of the things that we want to understand is that when we are engaging with change, especially within the mind, we want to consider a very specific thing, and that is that there are 2 parts of the brain that are going to help us be able to make significant changes in the way we interact with the world and in the way we interact with our own trauma, right? So we're going to jump over to IFS just for a moment, and I'm going to explain some things to you so that we can better understand these things. So there are 3 different parts in internal family systems. And internal family systems is a therapy style started back in the 80s. And it came from this type of therapist that kept hearing the term parts of people, like this part of me. And they started seeing that there was this common theme for people and their parts and the way they would interact with the parts, and the way they would interact was very consistent over different types of patients and clients, to the point where he said there's something here, right? Something's going on. So at that time, and the way he set it up is he set up into three systems where managers, these parts control and prevent pain through perfectionism or emotional detachment. Firefighters, these parts manage emotional distress through impulsive or numbing behaviors. So these parts hold unresolved pain, shame, or fear from earlier experiences. They remain frozen in developmental time, right? These are things that I also have talked about, right? So for me, you have the managers, which is like the adult brain. Then you have the firefighters, which is like the little kid brain. And then you have the exiles, which are also part of the little kid brain, but those are like the pains from the past, right? So those are fragments of your soul that have been left behind, and they are keeping you from feeling complete. So that's the way I would describe it. That's what I have described in the past, that these like pieces of your trauma are pieces that are like shattered throughout your history, and that you need to recollect it to become a full self again. And IFS is very similar in nature in believing this. We have a little bit of a difference of opinion of how the systems function, but in all, they are pretty much telling you the same belief system in one way or another, right? So what we want to think about here is two things. So number one, what IFS will tell you, and if you read the manual, it will talk about neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the idea that part of your brain is able to physically move around every time you focus on a subject. So when you're learning something, you're physically changing the way your brain understands this subject, right? So studying something is changing on a physical level the structure of your brain. There's another term called metacognition, which is the idea of thinking about thinking. So I like to think of the phrase, I think, therefore I am. And in this case, thinking before I am, if you relate it to what we just talked about, which is neuroplasticity, and you add them together, you get something really interesting. If you think about thinking, you can actually change the way you think about thinking, because you're changing the physical structure of your brain in the way it interacts with thinking. So the more that you work within the structures of your mind, the more you sit with yourself, the more you change the actual way you react to thinking. You change the thinking of your thinking. And the way to do this is to use what I like to, attribute to the 8 C's. The 8 C's have to do with the self as a natural healing state. The self is, we could call the soul, your heart, your what you would call personality, consciousness. Yeah, when you're conscious of others, when you're empathetic, it all comes from the heart, right? So mind, body, soul, mind, body, heart, mind, body, spirit, whatever, same thing. The empathy, the heart nature, the Buddha nature, it's all the same. Christ, it's all the same. So when we apply the 8 C's to this natural healing source, and we program it to interact with the parts of us, those parts we talk about, using these 8 C's, well, those parts of you are actually physically in your brain. There are physical places these parts exist. That's why when you recall them, it's recalling those parts of your mind. So what are we trying to do here? Well, when we go back and recall these different parts, right now they're used to us interacting with them in a very certain way, like a specific way, right? They've been conditioned to be responded to in a very unloving, fearful, toxic way. What we want to change is when we interact with these pieces of us, again, using the theory, that we can change the way our brain functions through active thought and over time rewire the brain, then we can go from a place of curiosity, of clarity, of calmness, of compassion, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness, right? I can go over all these things when I'm interacting with these parts, and I will literally rewire the structure and functioning of my mind, allowing me to have better outcomes from things in my life because of the way I've been able to really hone in on my perception of myself. That way, when I get tested by the world, when I get tested by life, I always pass because I'm so confident in who I am, because I've given myself the ability to sit with myself, sit with my being, sit with my understanding. I'm able to really identify my core belief systems. The more I can understand my core belief systems, the more I can anchor my future into my core beliefs, right? And that actually would be something that we could go into, for example, ACT. And ACT is a big thing about anchoring yourself into your value system, right? So if we can find, let me see if I can pull up. So I've been getting some new handouts, so I'm gonna kind of go over them and see what we got in here. But let's see, values, right? What truly matters here. So acceptance and commitment therapy. So here's another type of therapy that has a principle that I like to apply using what we did. So first we talked about the self energy. We talked about the parts. And the more you get to know the self, the more you get to know the values that the self has, the values that you truly hold, not the values that you have been conditioned to believe, but the values that truly come from within, which, as above, so below, the more you anchor yourself into this value system, the easier it is to accept, right, challenge and change, be present, and understand that the self, again, observing self, the self nature, is the one that's really ultimately running the show, right? And it can commit to action. It can commit to doing things. So as the parts of you show up and say, I want to do this, you say, we will. I want to, you will. And I can accept, hey, I'm not where I want to be. And that's talking to the voices that are within, right? Talking to the managers, hey, I get it. I need to work out more. Hey, I get it. I need to have more fun. Hey, I get it. I need to sleep. Hey, I get it. I never get to do anything. And you understand these parts, you are accepting of them, but you're also working with the self energy to develop a plan anchored in values that you find that are aligned with your belief systems. And then you set up your goals and objectives in a manner where you're able to follow through and stay consistent, stay motivated for your change. That's what we're looking for here. We're looking for these things, right? ACT focuses on increasing psychological flexibility rather than eliminating difficult thoughts or emotions. Again, this aligns really well with IFS. IFS tells you parts are not bad innately. They have natural good. Again, a firefighter doesn't want you to suffer. It actually wants to prevent suffering. It just doesn't always do it in the best way because the self doesn't put limits, right? You could say that managers also have saved your tail many times when you feel like you're going through a really difficult time, and it's been there at the right moment to say, gotcha, we did it. And so you want to believe it more because it has had times where it truly did meet its needs. The exiles, they're just reminders that you're hurting, that you still feel those deficits within you, and that is something you need to work through, right? So it aligns very well with ACT. Again, not rejecting your parts, but sitting with them and trying to understand them, right? Difficult thoughts and emotions are a normal part of being human. Trauma is a normal part of being, the reaction to trauma is the normal part about being human. The trauma itself is not normal, but the response to the trauma is normal. Getting injured is not the normal part, but the way you heal is the normal part. So the healing process is normal, not the damage. And that's something we got to take into consideration. We're talking about normality, right? There's a reason why it's healing, because something's off, right? Attempts to avoid or control internal experiences may increase distress. Let's go back to what I was saying about IFS. If I ignore the parts of me, then I end up in the situation where I've been at the beginning, where I'm here and hurting because I haven't been accepting the different parts of my past. So then I'm just reinforcing the same negativity that I've been trying to avoid, right? So again, highly connects with IFS, right? Just like somatic therapy can connect with the mindfulness traits. Thoughts are not always facts and do not need to dictate behavior. This is, again, how does it relate to IFS? Parts do not need to take over. The self needs to be in control. But parts do have a valid point. So you should really consider doing what they say, but not letting the part take over and doing it for you, because then it's going to mess your whole system up. It's going to overwhelm you. It's going to drain you. It's going to tire you out. So you are still in control of the parts. You must stay in control. So again, it continues to support the same ideas, right? Acceptance involves making room for experiences rather than struggling against them. This goes to the idea of sitting with the parts. You need to be calm, curious, connected, all those things that we were talking about earlier, right? You have to implement those in a way where you can sit with these parts. You can allow them to be without pushing them away and just be present with them. Allow these parts to tell you what's going on. Work with these parts, right? So acceptance is about making room for experiences like sitting with your parts rather than continuing the ignoring, continuing the exile, and they got you there in the first place, right? Values can provide direction and meaning even during difficult times. So again, meeting your parts and understanding your parts is what helps you fulfill your life, because they're all part of you. They're a part of the self that's trying to be expressed, but the self is suppressing them. So as you acknowledge that these parts exist, the more that you can provide yourself with meaningful experiences that continue to launch your individuality, your self-energy, your confidence into a forward motion, right? Values can... yeah, we did that one. Okay. Small, consistent actions can support meaningful change over time. So this is the same process of like how parts, you don't need to change everything in a day, but you do need to show that the change is coming. That I did make that little bit of a difference. I did do that thing that it wanted. I did say that thing that it was looking for. So even if you don't fully change, having those moments of there is something moving is what helps it stay confident and consistent with the way that it's moving towards, okay? So it's easier to keep parts on board that you're changing as long as you continue to respect the parts that come up. So if a part of you says like, hey, we should do this tonight, and you ignore that part, and again, even if it's something small, like taking care of yourself, right? Taking care of like brushing your teeth or like going and do something, you're like, whatever it may be, that little bit of, once you do it, that part feels fulfillment, even if it's a small thing that says, hey, at least you did that today. And that does go a long way. Better than ignoring, because ignoring just solidifies there's a problem, right? But addressing and working through it reinforces that there is a more positive way of approaching the situation, right? So even look like cognitive or psychological flexibility, being, again, curious, open nature, being accepting, being more open to negativity, be more vulnerable, right? Again, same principle, same concepts. Mindfulness and present moment awareness. Being the self requires being in the now, being in the right now, and reminding the parts of you who is the right now, who is this person. And value clarification. So when you listen to the parts of you, they're telling you your value system, and you are valuing your value system. Committed action. So following through helps the parts reduce their reactions because they're feeling heard. So they're actually working with you instead of against you. And experiential voice. So avoidance, right? I don't want to go over there. Again, has to do with the fear-based operation, taking you out of curiosity, taking you out of wonder, right? So when we go into avoidance, we're going into a fear-based state. And that fear-based state is keeping us from being able to move forward, make decisions, learn from our experiences. That fear is necessary for us to be able to find how we've grown in confidence. So fear is not necessarily a bad thing at the beginning, but it's actually, fear is the bad thing. What we need to not be worried about is concern or stress or, again, like wonder, because it's not that you need to fear things to do it well. It's the fact that you need to wonder about it to do it well. Wonder, why is that part so difficult, and who could show you, and what would help you understand it more. instead of I'm never going to learn, I shouldn't ask anybody. Like that negative mindset is only going to keep you stagnated and preventing you from moving forward. Psychological flexibility, except, okay, we did all that one. Yep. Common interventions, diffusion exercises. Diffusion is separating when thoughts are so ingrained in your mind that you like truly believe it. Like this has to be true because why? You really like have convinced yourself that this is reality. And so that's when we're talking about any kind of like diffusion, right? Well, we should say fusion. Diffusion has to do with separating these things. So diffusion has to do with separating like a belief system with my action. So I don't quite believe it anymore, so I'm allowed to separate the self and that belief. So it's not that I believe it, it's just I've been conditioned to believe that, or it's just a belief system that I've been told to have, right? Or it's something that I'm experiencing. Same thing as having a part. So in IFS, we call this process unblending. So diffusion and unblending are very similar in concept of separating the self energy with this part of me or this thought. So we see a thought as a part, or the part can just, again, be its own entity, but it's the same philosophy of separation versus blending or fusion, right? So another tactic of separating the self to gain perspective of the self. In IFS, they call it having like the mind, like the eye of like the almost like a mind's eye or the all-seeing eye, or like the objective perspective of the self. So like the eye above that looks below like everything that's happening. So like a concept of self. So that's the same idea of self energy from IFS. So another common or like another like factor between the two that give them like that common theme. So another like, whatever concept that you can see, there's connections there. Acceptance and willingness practices. Okay, so the one thing that we do in acceptance with IFS is learning to accept that there are parts and there's unblending and the parts are not you. And so what we're learning to do as well with this is to accept that in ACT that the discomforts that you're experiencing, those discomforts that you're having are separate from the self. So the self is experiencing this, but it's not the self, right? You are not your problems, you're experiencing problems, and you can also be your solutions. So acceptance is, again, separating from being the problem to having a problem, and then your willingness to keep separating the issue. So the continued process of unblending and holding that truth that you are not these things, but they do affect how you operate. So having that patience and then saying, okay, I can also be the difference that I want if I willingly change how I interact with the self. So that goes back to the metacognition and the neuroplasticity that I was talking about earlier. So we can accept and then change the neuroplasticity through active practice, right? Willingness. So as long as I'm willing to focus and practice, I'll be able to change. Mindfulness exercises. Most general therapy after CBT essentially like just accepts mindfulness as a core component of like therapy. Like ACT, there's mindfulness. DBT, there's mindfulness. Somatic therapy, right? There's mindfulness. What's the other one? There's even just like there's even CBT mindfulness CBT. Like it's literally everywhere. So IFS has mindfulness in it as well. They all have mindfulness. This is like a common. You might as well just say it's a part of therapy now. Okay, so they're like heavily involved. So mindfulness exercises are the ability of self-regulating, being present. So being able to cool the mind off or warm up the body to feel that present state, that mindful state. So getting out of the hyper arousal state or getting out of the hypo arousal state, and being able to be present and more fully aware of your intentions, right? I'm not doing everything, half-assed or distracted. I do things one per time, and I'm able to fully commit and fully engage and fully understand, right? Okay. Values clarification activities. So this is interesting because this is where you might get a little bit of a split. ACT really does hones in on what the value system is, and you're sitting there with the values. I would say more that IFS value system comes from being patient with the different parts, and I would say IFS believes that the value system of you comes from listening to your parts, because once the parts start working with you, they will tell you who you truly are. So they're both in a way trying to teach you how to work with your thoughts and feelings. Just one has more of a fanciful way of doing it, or more of like a creative, like artistic way, and one is more of like a direct manual kind of way. Like one is getting results from like a more dry, direct way, and one's getting results from a more artistic perspective, right? So you can get math from art, or you can get math from science. Like one's like a science, like evidence, like get it like fast, and this is how, more dry and direct, and another one's more colorful. And that's kind of the best way I can describe it, right? One's like a manual of like a follow these steps, and the other one's like an alchemical process through like through art, expressing it in an artistic fashion. And that's about the differences, I would say, in those two things, right? Like what's the difference about those two things? Yeah, so then we have, let's see, self as a context, observing self. This goes back to the self energy, being able to see the self outside of those things as the collection of everything that you are. So that's really self as a context. And then we have the value clarification. I think I talked about that for a second. So again, that's one of the things that you'd see a little bit different. Committed action. So this is where we see IFS again does connect with ACT here, where we in IFS want you to be able to get your parts to work with you, and they will give you goals. They'll give you objectives, and the self has to follow through. That is how you build trust with the parts. So the parts get trust when the self listens and follows through. So the more the self is attuned with following through, the more that everything is going to align. So that's where committed action does play a part, where you have to listen to the parts and follow through just as much as here you have to listen to your values and goals if you want to continue to sustain your self-care and value system. And experiential avoidance. So again, what is experiential avoidance? Well, when we run into situations, I think I might have skipped the part, but here we go. Experiential avoidance has to do with, again, I don't want to engage with something, and in parts work, it could be that a part is afraid, or you are afraid. There's a part of you afraid of being emotionally overwhelmed by a trigger. So then it allows the firefighter to take over, and the firefighter creates a distracting situation or a numbing effect so you can avoid. But that avoidance just continues to cause other problems, or you avoid by managing and reacting, which again goes back to an unhealthy system, all based on the fear of experiencing pain and being overwhelmed, right? Going back down to common interventions, we can talk about committed action plans. I think I got up to here. Committed action plans, yep. And behavior commitment, same thing. We just talked about that. Metaphors and experiential exercises. So ACT uses metaphors to explain things. So there's a lot of different metaphors that they'll work on. Even like the ACT matrix uses metaphors. And I really do like the ACT matrix. So if you ever have a chance to look it up, it's a great tool. I have it in my resource page linked as well. So what we want to think about when it comes to metaphors is that in IFS as well, they also use metaphors in the sense that they will explain the parts of themselves using different actions or different imagery, or even they'll describe sounds, they'll describe places. You can even do art to express some of these things. You may create things and then burn them later to help you process some internal feelings, like writing letters to people and yourself. So there's a lot of expression, you could say, and a lot of metaphors that will come out of that. And experiential exercise, there's a lot of ways to engage where you can sit with the selves, the parts of you, and sit there and do like some Gestalt type of therapy where you can talk to the different selves and engage. So again, there's common themes between these different philosophies and ideologies. Present moment and grounding tech practices. It's being quiet, being present, being mindful, allowing things to come and go, allowing parts to come out, being curious in nature, sitting with them, allowing them to come and help understand them through an open lens. So another way of being grounded, present, to be more in tune with what's happening in the internal mechanism. Self-compassion and strategy. So another way of looking at similarities. So the parts is being there's literally a whole, the 8 C's: compassionate, curious, calm, like so many different little ways of looking at the same idea of compassion to the self. And being compassionate to your parts is another part of the self, right? So you're able to be compassionate with parts of you is the same idea of being compassionate to the self, because the parts in the self are one in both. They are unified, so they're not really able to separate, so they have to be one in all. And again, just from this first page of what I'm talking about here, you can see that these core philosophies between these different, like, mental health groups are very similar in nature, right? They, at the core of what they teach, are teaching very similar things. So when we look at it from the big picture, we can say, hey, look, there is commonalities here of things that we can keep, understanding, and really understand the deep connections that all these things have, so that we can keep, learning at what is the core of mental health, what is the core of what we want to understand. And I have some other ones in here too. So that was ACT, right? Let's go ahead and go to a different one. Let's go ahead and look at maybe some DBT, right? So let's look at the DBT one. It's a very similar handout I think I got over here for DBT. Again, so what do we see here? Right up from the beginning, mindfulness. IFS and ACT both address mindfulness, because mindfulness, as I said before, is one of the top things that you're going to start seeing all over the place, because it's about being present. It's about being in the now. It's about letting go and dissolving into just being who you are at your core, right? Distress tolerance. Distress tolerance is learning how to manage your stress mechanism. And again, separating your thoughts, separating your feelings from the self, the thing that is you, is what helps you. So it's like accepting, I have to accept, the self has to accept this problem. And that is what distress tolerance is about. How do I accept that this sucks? How do I accept that this isn't great? But how do I also accept that I am not the suck? I am not the ungreat. I am the person experiencing the ungreat. But I am not the ungreat. I am just simply having to go through an ungreat situation, right? Emotional regulation. I am not the depression, but I am the thing that is experiencing this depression. But I am not the depression. Again, separating the self from these things, separating and accepting them as truths, that pain is part of progress, right? Interpersonal effectiveness. How do I talk with my inner world, right? So it goes back to what? The inner world. How do I talk with the parts of me? How do I engage? So similar ideas, right? Dialectical thinking, holding multiple truths, right? The truth that my inner critic can be very upset with me, but also want the best for me. That my firefighter wants me not to feel pain, but also is causing me further pain later in the future, right? That's dialectical thinking. That a part of me that I've abandoned years ago can still hurt me today, right? There we go, more dialectical thinking. Validation, helping people understand that these complex feelings and thoughts are valid. That the way their exiles are responding to the world are valid based on everything that they've been through and what they've had to go and survive, right? So these are all part of the system. The wise mind. This goes back to being mindful. I mean, if you really look at the wise mind, it's all about being present. It's the 8 C's. It's the calmness. If we look at the sympathetic system we talked about earlier, we can say the wise mind is the balanced one, right? The one where you can say it's the ventricle vagal system, right? So you can see that in that system, that's the balance. That's the key. We want to get back to that trinity, right? And even in that one, you can see the different parts of the the polyvagal theory, and you can see that the wise mind is the core one, the balanced one. The window, you can also say the wise mind in another form is the window of tolerance, right? Behavioral change, again, wanting to change how I respond to my discomforts, change how I respond to things. Emotional awareness. So, what is causing these triggers? What parts of me inside are reacting to the different parts of my past, right? Skills coaching. So, giving people meaningful ways, like again, the different things you saw today were like the 8 C's, or like we can say the 6 F's, or flesh it out, or focus on it, right? Feel it. All these different things. And then generalizing skills into daily life. We do that in all therapies, right? That we are trying to find a way that we can apply this mindfulness tool, this presence tool into daily living. And it goes back to the more that you transform your life to have meaning for you, the more meaningful your life will become. The more that you can feel like, hey, my life really does matter. Why? Because I built myself into a place where I have true confidence. I live the life that I want to have. I am the person I want to be. And just like I tell people, the shape of a toroidal is the shape of the universe. You could focus on the pressure coming down on you and pushing back, or you can focus on just being you so much that you see where life takes you. So you stop waiting to put all your energy to push back on the pressures on you, and you push your energy to become the self-expression that you were. Not so much focused on trying to fight the stressors that are pushing back, but more on focusing your energy on expressing your true nature. Okay? So work on self-expression more than you work on sustaining an image that you don't even care for, right? It's not your image, it's the image that you've been put into. And so, yeah, that's, again, dialectical behavioral therapy. And let me see if I have any more of those. I think those are the main ones. So we got ACT, we got DBT, and I don't know if I have one for CBT, but let me see real quick. Yeah, I don't think I have one for that one. But that's the core, right, of these different things. As far as CBT goes, again, it's kind of hard to see that kind of system that I had for you guys. I don't really have like a generalized. What we can look into, though, is, again, the ways that we can work on these things. Like, for example, calming your mind type of this journal and things, and how far like a lot of these belief systems can go, right? Setting up corners for yourself, setting up rituals and routines, right? Having your awareness, having your discipline to create self-healing systems within yourself. It's also important to tell people that it's important to become vulnerable, because vulnerable is the first step of healing. If you only are strong, you can never heal, because vulnerability, just like you can power through a toothache, but in order to heal it, you have to be vulnerable enough to let the doctor, or I guess the dentist in that case, work on it. So whatever you're going through, you're going to have to like allow vulnerability to be a part of your life if you want to truly heal. Just like taking the vulnerability of working on these tools, even though these tools may seem ridiculous sometimes, they may feel like there's no point. That is actually the main problem, is that you're not vulnerable enough to allow it to happen, which is just the true issue. The issue isn't that the tool's not going to work. The issue is that you are unwilling to be vulnerable enough to learn in a way where you can really learn about yourself. So once you have applied that principle and philosophy into your life, that being vulnerable is actually how you get to success and how you heal through trauma, is the day that you will truly be able to take claim of your life again and truly follow forward with the highest potential that you are, right? So these are some things I wanted to bring up today. I think these are all important aspects of healing, aspects of like how to manage your life, and how to find self-love, and just important things to know that, hey, there are ways of being able to unlock the true self. There are ways where you can understand how to manage your stress, understand how to manage your feelings, And the beauty of all of that is that you get a more pure version of the true self. Because when you are in hyper arousal or when you are in hypo arousal, these states of being take you out of your true nature. So until you can, find your true nature, your Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it, your Christ consciousness, right? Christ conscious coherence, empathy, common sense, emotional intelligence. Until you can find that place, it's going to be really hard to operate in a world where you were meant to be that person. Now, you can say you've been conditioned to be in a different type of world, but there's a reason why the majority of the population is unhappy with where their life is. They feel a sense of unsatisfaction, represented by their lack of creativity, lack of purpose, lack of sense of direction, pessimism. So once you find that love in your heart, you find that the world becomes a much more curious place, which is why children learn how to play, but adults can learn how to compose. So when you're learning an instrument, you call it playing, and when you want to write music, you call it composing. Because playing comes from an open nature and composing comes from a focused nature. So be vulnerable, be open so that you can hone in and focus. All right, guys, that should be it for today. If you guys have any questions, reach out, let me know. But I hope that today was enlightened and informative. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.